Welcome to My Best Save, the podcast where the world's top surgeons reveal their most extraordinary moment in the operating room. Get ready for gripping stories of life-saving maneuvers that defy the odds. I'm your host, Dr. Jeremy Nikfarjam, a board-certified plastic surgeon in New York City. Discover the secret to surgical heroics that become legendary educational cases. See you in a stitch. Welcome to My Best Save, the podcast that highlights the healthcare heroes in this country. I am your creator, I'm your host, Dr. Jeremy Nick, board-certified plastic surgeon, and someone who loves what they do. I was born to breed and to love and to want to save lives. This podcast is going to feature all kinds of healthcare situations, healthcare hero situations, to really highlight the common day, unbelievably extreme scenarios that surgeons, doctors, nurses, PAs, NPs, and more are put in front of, and how they use their character, their training, their passion, and who they are as a person to be heroic. So we're on another episode today, and I'm going to tell you this crazy story that I encountered. Feel free to follow me on Instagram, Dr. J. Nick Plastic Surgery. DM, give me suggestions, give me your feedback, send it to your friends. We want all of you guys to engage with us and spread the word, because we want you as a healthcare hero or a future healthcare person or just anybody to be empowered to do good. So on this episode, I'm going to tell you a story about the lost thumb. You heard me right, the lost thumb. Many moons ago, many years ago, I was a resident. And on our resident journey, we encounter all kinds of extreme, bizarre situations. The best surgical training that exists is one that you can never plan for. It is the world of what I call chaos. And you begin and grow to really love the concept of chaos, the unpredictability, the variability, the extreme setting in nature, the idea of making quick decisions based on principles, and always erring on the side of doing good and doing the right thing. That's the bottom line principle. Always do good and always try to do the right thing. You never can lose like that. Even if a patient doesn't understand that, we take our time to explain if we can, if we have the luxury of that. But we have to always err on the side of looking out and advocating for the best interest of our patients, not for ourselves, but for the patients. So many years ago, I was a chief resident in our city hospital, and city hospitals are famous for being busy, for taking care of the underserved and underprivileged in society. And in New York City, what that means is a lot of trauma, gunshots, stab wounds. I'm talking about all day and night, people coming in with all kinds of crazy situations, machete injuries, stabs, being shot at this situation that time, falling from the roof of buildings. Anything you can think of came to this hospital. Well, one day I get a call from our intern, and they said, hey, can you come down to the trauma bay? We have a patient who really needs plastic surgery. They consulted plastics, the ER did. So, it wasn't really a level 1 or level 2 trauma. We didn't have to run over. But we came down to the ER, and I came to see a really unorganized looking man, meaning unkempt, unshaven, a little rough, just a little bit maybe of some mental health things going on. And he was yelling in pain and holding his left hand like this. And he was saying, oh, my thumb, my thumb, my thumb. And, bleeding out of the wound. They had hit some kind of immature gauze wrapping that was dirty and didn't look well. And after the emergency room did their trauma survey, meaning they made sure there were no life-threatening injuries. Patient didn't sustain an injury to the brain, to the chest, to the abdomen, none of the mid-box structures that are really important to vitality and for life. Once it's determined it's not life-threatening, that's when they consult, let's say, someone like us in plastic surgery. So he came down, he's holding his thumb, yelling and screaming in pain. And I asked this gentleman, what happened? And he can't really articulate what's going on. But I unwrapped the gauze, trying to distract him with conversation. You know, surgeons and doctors, we use any technique we can to distract someone to do something. It's an art form. So I was kind of unbandaging. I'm like, sir, where are you from? Where did you grow up? What are you feeling? Are you have any pain? And he's yelling and screaming, holding his thumb. And as the gauze, the last layer came off, I'm looking at his thumb and he's missing 3/4 of his thumb. I mean, like gone, right? So I'm thinking, how in the world has happened? It looked completely macerated and edged, and it was not clean and it was jagged. Like, what could have caused this? So after I finally got lidocaine and was able to numb his finger up, he became comfortable, he became calm. I gave him a really nice, tight, secure wrap. And I asked him, what happened? He said, well, we were fighting. This guy stole my food. I got upset, I pushed him, and then he bit it off. So this poor guy, it sounds to me like he had an altercation with another homeless man, and he himself was homeless. Really a tough situation. And he got into an argument, an altercation with another individual on the street, fighting over food. I mean, something so sad and terrible. And that person attacked him and bit off his thumb. Now, in these scenarios, what we want to know is there a part? Is there a piece of this thumb that we can use? And EMS, as I asked them, I made sure they couldn't find it. It was gone. So it looks like the assailant, or the person who got into the fight with him, really got rid of it somehow, or it was gone. The field, they didn't have it in the field. This patient didn't know what it was. There was no capacity to reattach it or replant the thumb. Thumb should be replanted. And if it's possible, because it's probably the most important digit of the whole hand, even though it's non-dominant, we're mostly right-hand dominant, it's still extremely important to life and dexterity and the ability to function as a normal human being, to eat, to write, to button your shirt, to do anything normal. You kind of need a thumb, right? So there was no idea, there's no chance that we could replant this. So we admitted the patient to the hospital, gave him IV antibiotics, pain management, wound care. We had social work see him, and we cared for him. You know, city hospitals are often a sanctuary, as even our hospital. They're there to care for the underprivileged, underserved, and to provide the medical care as well. So we admitted this patient to the hospital. We kept him for a couple of days, and then we had to make a surgical plan of how are we going to reconstruct this lost part of his digit, this lost part of his thumb. And we had a little mini conference with the plastic surgery team, led by our bosses who are the attending physicians, the chief of the service, me as a chief resident, and the residents and interns that I'm overseeing. And we got together, we had a little mini conference, and they asked, Dr. Nikfarjam, can you give me all the various options we have to reconstruct this thumb? And I said, well, we can do a toe to thumb transfer. We can take his big toe, disconnect it, and transfer it to his thumb, which is a known operation. We can rebuild it using tissue from his groin and reattach it to his thumb as a flap. We can also do other various maneuvers to kind of rebuild it in parts that require stages. Now, all of those options are valid. The problem is that you have to really take into consideration your patient, right? You have to have a surgical plan that is customized to the patient, which is why doctors have to understand their patients. And staging an operation won't work on this gentleman. Doing a very elaborate operation won't work on this gentleman because it requires a donor site that may have wound healing problems or requires a complexity that he may not be compliant for. So my former, attending boss when I was in that time said to me, we're going to do an operation that you've never seen before. And I'm thinking, well, what the heck can that be? He's like, we're going to bury his thumb. And I'm thinking in my mind, bury a thumb? Bury it in what? Well, it turns out there is an age-old operation that when you're missing a part, you can take that part and bury it into the abdomen in order to allow tissue to engraft and heal in the wound, and then disconnect that aspect in a couple weeks, allowing you to fashion and recreate a thumb and close the donor site at the same time. Really interesting operation. Has been done for what they claim almost even 100 years. It was the old school way to build body parts, is to bury it in some structure. Now, we doctors love to spend time drawing and planning and coming up with all these sophisticated plans. But at the end of the day, it means nothing until you do it. So we spent time designing this of a thumb burial, and we then went to present it to the patient. We determined through a psych consult that he had the capacity, the ability to give consent, meaning he understood, and he did. And we became friends over the time too. So we talked to him, got to know him, we fed him. We became more of friends than just doctors with him. And then we presented this option to rebuild the thumb through burying it in his abdomen. Through an elaborate drawing process and through explanation, he understood very well. And he provided consent to proceed. And we said to him, after surgery, we're going to keep you in this hospital in your room for 2 to 3 weeks. We'll let you move and walk and eat and do normal things so you don't feel stuck. But we have to keep you under observation to make sure this heals well. And we're going to disconnect it at about 3 weeks. Take care of the remaining reconstruction of the thumb and the donor site, and you're great, and you can carry about your life. Well, we go about the operation. We design a template from the thumb, put on the abdomen, the angle, the arc, the bend of the elbow, everything to the T engineered, everything to the T customized, right? We design all of it, performed the operation where while he was asleep, I made an incision in his abdominal crease, elevated the skin like we do a tummy tuck, same principles, just different reason. Elevated the skin, took that piece of thumb that was missing, buried it inside of that wound and wrapped the wound over the thumb and stitched it down to its original position. Almost like lifting the hood of the car, putting something in and putting it back over. And carried out to perfection. Fashioned him a dressing and a splint that made him feel a little more comfortable, and gave him some pain medicine, and he was done. Hour and a half, finished. He was in recovery, did great, went to his room, was doing great. We had him, we had the whole post-operative protocol in play. And fast forward a day after surgery, 2 days after surgery, 3 days after surgery, everything is going fantastic. Patient's healing great. Everyone's happy. I'm in the OR on a random, I would say Wednesday or Thursday morning. I'm operating on another patient, and my intern runs in and says, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. I'm like, well, what's going on? What happened? Is everything okay? And he says, Mr. So-and-so. I'm like, what about him? Is something wrong with his arm? He goes, I don't know. I'm like, well, what's the problem? And my intern says, he left. And I said, what do you mean he left? And he said to me, he left the hospital. I said, how did he leave the hospital? He said he just left AMA. AMA means against medical advice. He just walked out, took his IV out and walked out. Well, we got a problem, because a patient walking out in between a staged procedure as a homeless man with nowhere to go, no disposition plan, no follow-up plan, no ability to even watch him and do any kind of surveillance, we got a problem. So I'm scrubbed into surgery, and I tell my intern, you get yourself outside on that street in the Bronx. You walk yourself down to that street and you find him and you bring him back to me. That's a direct order. And some people might say, well, can you do that? Can you make a doctor leave the hospital and go look for a patient? The answer is you do what you have to do the right thing for your patients, even if it's a little bit out of the box or ordinary. So we sent a search party out, and after an hour or two, we sent another resident out. And after another hour, we're approaching the evening now, 3 residents went out, including security guards and including social workers. This man was gone. We put feelers out, calls out. We talked to the hospital precincts. We talked to the local firehouses, the local clinics. We sent memos everywhere that such and such person in this situation, if you find them, please call us. Almost like a missing person, almost like putting a missing person report out. Now, time goes on, extremely worried, anxiety up the roof. And all I'm thinking now every night is, how could I find him? I used to drive around in the morning and evenings. I'm talking about 4 or 5 in the morning and 8 o'clock at night, just driving on the streets of the Bronx, looking for someone that had this issue. I mean, we know what it looked like, but it could be a little bit covered. And no luck, right? 2 weeks go by, and about 2.5 weeks go by, and we're on a long line outside for some kind of like a pretzel food truck, some nonsense. It's like a mild, moderate, sort of spring afternoon. And I'm in this long line answering phone calls with my residents now. I'm nearing the end of this particular rotation. I'll be leaving the hospital soon, okay? And on this line, I'm looking out and I see that there is a gentleman wearing a jacket, like a sort of raincoat type jacket. It looked very distinct because it did not look proper. It looked like it didn't belong in the crowd. It looked very weathered. And as I approach this gentleman from the back and from the side, I notice there is one sleeve that's vacant. There's one sleeve that doesn't have an arm going through it. And my antennas go up. I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe it. I then walk around and I look dead into his eyes. And I saw, that is my patient. So what do you do in this situation? You're outside on the street, you locate your patient, we buried his thumb, we're looking for him everywhere, we can't find him. All of a sudden he surfaces on a food line. So what do? I walk up to him and I say, sir, you're coming with me. I grab him, obviously with his consent, he couldn't be forced. I explained to him who I was, he recognized me. I kind of take him, I hug him, I bring him over up the hill and over the mountain and into the actual emergency room entry. I walked him through the ER. And I had my white coat on, my scrubs on, my badge on. Everyone knew it's me. Everyone in the hospital knows me. I walked him in. I checked him in. I walked him into the actual emergency bay in the emergency room. I admitted him to the hospital. I waited for him to be eligible for surgery, which took 6 to 8 hours from the previous meal. The poor guy didn't get lunch. I interrupted it. I took him to the operating room that night. I didn't leave his side. I didn't trust that he was going to stay with us or he might change his mind to leave. Got a full informed consent, so nothing is forced here. You can't really force someone to have surgery. And I walked him into the emergency room holding his other vacant hand. That operation, I disconnected this flap, debulked the extra tissue, fashioned a new length for his thumb. I took the donor site, kind of tucked it down, made it look nice, and put a dressing on, and did a beautiful, I think, successful operation. Really nicely done. Hour and a half again. Kept him in recovery, admitted him to the hospital. I fed the poor man, gave him coffee. He deserved it, right? We interrupted his life. The next day, we rounded on him, and that afternoon, my resident comes in and says, guess what? This patient, once again, left the hospital against medical advice. He's on the street. I can't find him. What do I do? And I say to him, we're done. We did what we had to do. We saved this gentleman's thumb for another day. And for now, unless we can find him for follow-up, we know we did the right thing, presumably that he actually filled his prescription for antibiotics. So, long story short, the case of the lost thumb with a life saved and a thumb saved on an interesting scenario. And as I tell all my viewers and all my listeners, another life saved. Thank you for tuning in to My Best Save. Tune in to our next episode. We'll be basically relaying another amazing story of life-saving heroics by healthcare heroes.